Welcome to the Filmanalysis. Today with Salò, or The 120 Days of Sodom by Pier Paolo Pasolini, the most scandalous film. Sometimes even today only the edited version is available. Apparently some want this film to remain banned. Pasolini's last film, not only because he died shortly afterwards and did not live to see it released in cinemas, but also as it finished his cinematic work. Pasolini planned to devote himself to a major novel project afterwards. Salò is not only unique because it is scandalous and wrote history, moreover, something unique happened in film history. When Pasolini directed Salò in 1975, he simultaneously published a retraction of his Trilogy of Life. The Trilogy of Life consisted of 3 films celebrating lust and the frivolous. 3 film adaptations of erotic literature, Decameron, The Canterbury Tales and Arabian Nights. Those 3 were supposed to show the beauty of the eroticism of the body. Pasolini, however, revokes the trilogy in 1975 and distances himself from his work. He writes, "The progressive struggle against censorship and the struggle for sexual freedom have been ruthlessly swept away as consumerism has decided to grant a broad and thus fundamentally false tolerance. The reality of innocent bodies has also been raped, manipulated, subjugated by consumerism. More precisely, this violence towards the human body has become the universal feature of the new human epoch. Private sexuality, like mine, is equally traumatized by false tolerance and physical humiliation. What used to be agony and bliss of sexual fantasies is now only suicidal disappointment and grey unwillingness." End of quote. This very recantation led Pasolini to Salò. He uses it to film an erotic text by Marquis de Sade, the material differing from the film as it is very tender. De Sade describes sexual perversions and heightens them to the point of torture, blood and execution. The flowery descriptions and, at some point, leaving Marquis de Sade merely listing outrages, creating a catalogue of perversions. In his film, Pasolini takes de Sade's material from pre-revolutionary French times to 1944 to the Fascist Republic of Salò, a puppet state of the Italian and German fascists where Mussolini was once again allowed to rule. At the beginning of the film, the fascist military captures underage girls and boys and takes them to a stately manor. There, 4 men in their 50s await them: the Duke, the Bishop, the Magistrate and the President. They stand on the balcony and proclaim the law of this perverse republic. They say everything is allowed. There are no taboos. The abductees and the spectators should expect 3 circles of hell: the circle of passion, of shit and of blood. In between, old prostitutes can be seen in the orgy hall, above all Mrs. Vaccari. She tells of experienced perversions, how a substantially older man deflowered her when she was 7. These stories concern economics and sexuality. People meet in the orgy hall to listen to these stories and to be inspired. These experiences need to be put into practice. It is not about liberated orgasmic sex, which Pasolini clearly rejects. It is all about repression and torture. Pasolini explicitly shows how the young people must eat shit and takes this to ever greater extremes. In the final circle of hell, the bodies are maltreated with branding irons, the four-man dance to executions like in a musical. Horror fans may be hardened to this, but it is not about gore or severed heads. Rather, one should consider what Salò reveals regarding fascism and capitalism. Salò contains an unusual analysis of fascism. One of the four gentlemen supposes fascists to be the true anarchists, which seems counterintuitive at first. Many associate fascism with order and uniformity. There is an Italian film tradition, the Sadico Nazista, these films of the 60s and 70s that Pasolini's work is related to. This tradition understands fascism also as excess, sexual transgression of boundaries. These films made use of theoretical fascism, but above all German National Socialism. For example, Liliana Cavani's film The Night Porter is about an erotic BDSM relationship between a concentration camp warden and his inmate. Piquantly, the relationship is even resumed in the post-war period. Back to Pasolini. After all, the oppressors can do what they want with the oppressed. Fascism is shown as anti-Christian at the same time. Anyone who prays in Salò is immediately executed. At the same time, we have a completely hollow bourgeoisie. Although everything is perverted, we still have weddings. Completely empty civic rituals unfold in ridiculous ceremonies. Salò therefore also criticizes the bourgeoisie in general. We have strict regulations, clear hierarchies, but within this framework total debauchery is possible. Who lays down a regulatory framework that allows everything? It is sometimes said that freedom supposedly reigns, but more importantly, who controls freedom? Pasolini's style matters significantly here. The Trilogy of Life was playful, the camera reveled in the bodies, in sexual acts. Salò, on the other hand, is strictly formalistic with very clear camera work and long takes. The camera often takes a central perspective built up like an architectural sketch, trying to objectively depict an experimental arrangement. The Trilogy of Life was set in pre-enlightenment times, so the camera was yet to be rational. In Salò, the enlightenment had already turned into what one may call instrumental rational use. Here, cold dehumanizing rationality prevails. Not only Pasolini's thesis, but also of the Frankfurt School, especially Max Horkheimer and Theodor W. Adorno, among other things. A chapter from Dialectic of Enlightenment deals with this. It states, the rulers sought to shield the bourgeois world from the flood of naked violence, which now has broken over Europe, only for as long as economic concentration was insufficiently advanced. Previously, only the poor and savages had been exposed to the untrammeled force of the capitalist elements, but the totalitarian order has granted unlimited rights to calculating thought and puts its trust in science as such. Its canon is its own brutal efficiency. From Kant's critique to Nietzsche's genealogy of morals, the hand of philosophy had traced the writing on the wall. One individual put that writing into practice in all its details. The work of the Marquis de Sade exhibits understanding without direction from another, that is to say, the bourgeois subject freed from all tutelage. Now, everything is possible, write Horkheimer and Adorno, explaining how rationalist de Sade's thinking already was. Pasolini strides along the philosophical path Horkheimer points out. Whoever is not willing to talk about capitalism should also keep quiet about fascism, wrote Horkheimer in his famous essay The Jews and Europe on the eve of World War II. Both Frankfurt School thinkers and Pasolini's view fascism as the logical development of capitalism. Pasolini takes it even further in post-fascist Italy, postulating consumer industry's fascism turned out to be even more total. Capitalism tends to collect, quantify and catalogue. It demands exact quantities. Just like the four gentlemen listening to the prostitute stories, sometimes they interrupt, inquire about the penis's exact size and the amount of ejaculate. Everything is quantified. It is about measuring the sexual feeding access into the process of exploitation. Everything becomes exploitable and pleasure must be derived from everything, must yield profit. You can compare it with social media. Every interaction, no matter how hateful or stupid, produces profits for the platforms. The four masters soon decide that all the shit of the sex slaves must be collected to be consumed later. There is talk of the greatest possible benefit. Humans and their excrement represent resources to be exploited. Critics suggest it to be Pasolini's sick fantasy. But let's look back to the 19th century. In 1863, seamstress Mary Ann Walkley had to sew dresses for rich ladies every day between 16 and sometimes even 30 hours at a stretch. To endure it at all, she was repeatedly boosted with coffee and port. She died in 1863 of overwork, as it is so succinctly called. She was crammed into a small room with 30 seamstresses sharing beds with them. Nowadays, workers in large corporations are not allowed to go to the toilet but must pee in bottles so that the productivity rate does not drop. At the same time, there are natural limits of capitalism also considered by the four gentlemen. They think it is wonderful that the act of sex can be repeated endlessly, but dislike that the act of killing, which also brings them pleasure, cannot be repeated. Capitalism wants to extend and repeat exploitation endlessly. That's why climate change is becoming a problem for capitalism. The example of Mary Ann Walkley shows the exploitation's limits. These narratives aren't supposed to inspire a little. Rather, the logic is crucial. Capitalism needs such narratives to legitimize itself, to boost itself, one might add, to get horny. More perversity means more production, but the real pleasure is absent. Salò disturbs with insane listlessness, oozing no eroticism at all. This listlessness usually characterizes documentaries about porn shoots. Behind the scenes, the porn actors are bored, standing around and somehow trying to maintain an erection. This mood also sets in Salò. Sometimes the pornography is acrobatic and drastic, but never lustful. Pornography features this bored penetration as Pasolini demonstrates. It is not really a joyous celebration, but a very sad event. Pasolini saw it that way himself too, and no longer enjoyed sexual services in his last months before death. It's about rationalization, about industrialized sex. We feel this even more strongly today than we did back then due to dating apps. Just think of sex toys controlled with money during webcam sex. Nowadays, capitalism penetrates every orifice of the body. But Salò is not only about fascism and capitalism, it is also about the bourgeoisie, which Pasolini despised abysmally. This is shown in a parodic moment when the four gentlemen choose who has the most beautiful butt of all the boys and girls. They illuminate these asses and judge them like pieces of art. Pasolini satirizes the bourgeois view of art for art's sake. But that's a nice bulge. You must put that a bit higher. I like that quite a bit, and so on. The conversations from museums that only those who hate art entertain. Pasolini takes these conversations to the extreme. Moreover, the film doesn't only take place in 1944. Several times the gentlemen retire to the next room furnished like a CEO's office in the 70s. Not an accidental anachronism, but deliberately chosen. One could speculate that Pasolini wants to show us a somewhat different fascism here. Modern paintings hang on the walls, the gentlemen sit on modern furniture, Art Nouveau and Bauhaus are added, futurism on the walls, a clear reference to fascism. You can also see Cubism. Pasolini is settling accounts with avant-garde art here. Meanwhile, the permanent border crossings common in the avant-garde art, we know it from the right today. Pasolini questions precisely those border crossings and underlines Cubism's dismemberment of the body resembles the torture scenes. There are only two loving couples, only briefly visible in Salò. Two girls visit each other during the night's rest, and a communist who will die with his fist raised and a black servant also meet at night for a rendezvous. Once again, the Trilogy of Life briefly flashes up here the idea that it could also be different in another society. But these are only moments. The film ends with torture and murder. The four gentlemen take turns watching from a distance what the others are doing. We often look at these scenes through a window. We are also meant to be in a spectator position. The gentlemen call young men wearing 70s hairstyles and turtlenecks the sons of the ruling class, so to speak, inheriting their father's wealth. Pasolini was murdered before the film was released, allegedly by a hustler. This hustler confessed but recanted 30 years later. Many suspect powerful people murdered Pasolini as he might have known too much. At the very least, the gay Catholic communist slowly became too uncomfortable. It's certain, however, proven by his opus magnum Salò, that Pasolini wanted us, as terrible as it is, not only to watch, but to see. It would be nice if you would like to support the Filmanalysis financially. You can do so via my bank account or PayPal. Also, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you very much.